There we go. David, how are you?
Wonderfully. I'm happy to be back with you and always enjoy our conversations. And we had a great one last time, so here we go one more time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always appreciate when I get little messages in Messenger, and any of our interactions are always really joyful, and I'm never surprised by that.
Yeah, it's
I did
beautiful.
say to you that I regret not grabbing my sunglasses, knowing that you were going to be on the screen with your big, beautiful glow.
Uh,
I think it'd be cloudy down in Mexico at the moment, wouldn't it, if the Hoff wasn't strutting around in his shorts?
I don't know what it would be, but it's usually pretty sunny. So, but it's a sunny disposition, you know. I guess I was singing a lot. The Gershwin song, "Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street." And of course, that's right-mindedness for us Course in Miracles students and teachers. So we're hoping to go fully and stay on the sunny side of the street. And life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street, you know, but to have that inner glow that comes from our heart and from our purpose, and be the light of the world, light the world up with that purpose.
Mm. And also, something that we were talking about just before we pressed record is also the importance for people to know that when that becomes, you could call like your default setting or your go-to vibration, that is the result of a lot of work. And, David Hoffmeister, the character, wasn't born into a Disney movie where the Bambi was around and birds were tweeting all the time and little butterflies, over the past 35 plus years, you've had a journey to achieve this inner peace and this glow, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it's like somehow the course finds us, or we find the course at a time maybe when we're ready and willing. And sometimes people have told me that they're willing, but maybe not so ready, and then they use it as a plant stand or a doorstop for a few years. I've heard a lot of fun stories on my travels, but I think I was very willing and ready, but emotionally, I think I know we've talked and how you had more of a quiet and private, sheltered kind of life and existence, and I did too.
Mm.
So when you get a book that is so helpful and transformative to really open the heart, open the mind, uh, build confidence in inner guidance and in intuition, and slowly take us away from those child patterns, egoic child patterns, the self-concept patterns that are formed really in our mind before the body seems to be in a womb. We've got a self-concept. I know there's authors like Carolyn Myss that talk about contracts and everything, and even Helen Schuckman was told at the beginning in the early messages that people are being called from all over to take their part in a prearranged plan,
Mm.
which is called the celestial speed up. And for me now, I can see that in my experience with the course, that it has been a celestial speed up, but getting the course and studying the course and reading the course and practicing it for so many years kind of took me through stages of loosening from the self-concept of David,
Yeah.
because I got the course in my late 20s, and for most people around the world in many civilized or Western cultures, the late 20s is a time of establishing your career
Mm.
and carving out your niche in society, and you're basically getting your launch boat for your career or your survival and your entire lifespan. And so to have the course come, which we both know is kind of it's like a dismantling energy when you're supposed to be building. For me, it was late 20s. I was supposed to be the architect and building the self-concept, and then have this opposing force or this alternate force come in that was for unschooling instead of education, and undoing instead of doing, and being instead of striving to achieve. Then it's a very different way of going about a lifespan, a lifetime. So I feel like, yeah, the key thing has been that I've been just willing to go with it, knowing that things were not going to be kind of what I planned them to be. Whatever ambitions and goals I had as a teenager, which weren't many, but even during those years in university, in my 20s, I was still there in the university in the context of where you're supposed to be building and learning. And then when I finally got to a school psychology program on a scholarship, it was a very kind of elite program. I think it was rated the second best in the United States, but I was on full scholarship, and I was actually looking into books like Ivan Illich and unschooling, much to the shock of my professors, my graduate professors, like, what are you doing? So that was right before the course came, but I could see that the signs and symbols were all over for me, that this was going to be a very, very different lifetime than I had ever imagined.
And interestingly as well, I know that something that I can relate to when we look at the journey and we can sort of put it into decades, and sort of that there seems to be an overarching kind of characteristic to certain decades with the course as well, doesn't there? You know, and you look back
Yes.
on it and you think, oh, okay, that first 10 years, the second 10 years, the third 10 years, and I'm only into the next decade, like by a year or so, but already that's unrecognizable compared to the last 10 years kind of thing. There's a shape and a form to the phases, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It seems like I always took it in context too, that the first receivers, so to speak, the original four, um, they had professional lives, and they weren't necessarily um, completely steeped in anything like religion. Uh, Ken had his Judaism, and Helen with some Catholicism and some atheism, and Bill, he had a very interesting kind of a mix at the beginning too, and Judy, and so I feel like that was a good example for me, that they were taking this on with very much with families and professional lives and work relationships and so forth, and then just trying to do their part, like
Mm,
they made a commitment, maybe deep in their mind, to complete their
mm,
part, pretty much a lifelong part, to the bringing the course into time and space and getting it published and disseminated, and then the beginning teachings of it.
mm,
And so that's a very, very early phase. Just as if you go back to the early days of philosophy or psychology, you can look at a whole history of psychology and see these different phases.
mm,
And even with people like Mary Baker Eddy, who I just watched a documentary again on her life. I find that most fascinating, because all the years of depression and sadness and sickness, and a failed marriage, and such health problems, and her son taken away from her to a foster family, and then taken out west to, I think, Oklahoma, and then all the way through this, I would say, dignified life of metaphysical achievement, I would call it, including healing and so forth. And then maybe in her 80s, people coming to try to say she's incompetent and to try to take everything away from her, the whole church and everything. It reminds me of that line in the Course where Jesus says, the ego will pursue you beyond the grave. He could have put, the ego will pursue you to the grave and beyond the grave, which sounds kind of dark, but it shows us that we have to be pretty easy on ourselves during this dismantling, because it's a death wish that we're exposing, and that is usually very intense emotionally. I would say that's one of the characteristics of a lot of the stages, especially the early stages, was this like purging and intense flushing up of darkness, where you feel schizophrenic, you feel like you're losing your mind, you're going insane, because it's taking the roots out. It's just dismantling the roots of the ego in the unconscious mind. And so it's not really like many things that are just tinkering with the surface of consciousness. This is getting down to the roots of consciousness, to the subconscious, the unconscious mind that Jung called the shadow. And yeah, many people who know me, they know all the parables, and they know for myself and for them as they came in contact with me how intense it's been for everyone involved in this journey, going through the darkness to the light.
And that just helps everybody to feel normal. Ken's lovely thing, just be normal, be a bit kinder. It just helps everybody to know that what they can aspire to can become something tangible and achievable for them. But that journey is not plain sailing. We do get the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And in fact, I was thinking about Myron Jones, just at a beautiful podcast with Myron, and she was saying, let's not forget that this is like a spiral, this learning. We come out, it's not a linear path as such. But I think, what struck me there was like when you alluded to or used the word commitment. And it also made me think of like a Ramdas kind of thing, where he was talking from a psychedelic point of view of this huge influx of energy or a channel opening. And there's a phrase literally called ego death, which is like this tipping point where people's experience hinges upon whether they grip on, terrified and desperate to this construct of who they believed their self to be. And if that's the case, then the psychedelics have an effect on them, which is just awful, because all of that additional power in the mind that's unlocked through this plant means that they can't cope with that force. And then the people who at that point let go and let that dissolve and just say, right, okay, I held, for some people, it's like you held that belief of who you were for decades, and then they have this experience, which isn't obviously exclusive to a psychedelic experience. It's the same principle, which is, I guess, why it's come up in my mind. And then when you are allow yourself to not fight that and let it go, then you can be carried by this new amount of power that's become like exposed to you or into your awareness or something. But that commitment is key, isn't it?
Yeah, it's key. And I like that in the Manual for Teachers, where he talks about the stages of development of trust, that he has his stages there. And I think we start with a commitment. We start to see more and more as we go along that the commitment is a key, and the commitment really is to trust the inner guide, to trust the Holy Spirit, to trust Jesus, to trust our intuition, and that this trusting of this direction, of this guidance, is going to take us in a way that's very different from the ego. the opposite direction. It's going to take us toward the light instead of trying to wind into a self-concept goals that are based on the body and time and space, past and future. And this is more of a, like with Ram Dass, is a beautiful example of taking us really deeper toward that present moment of that escape, the closest approximation to eternity that this world offers. Jesus calls the present moment. And yet that's so different from anything we've been educated about. Our parents might have mentioned, it here and there, but the value of now was not paramount. The value was education and building a sense of self, finding your niche and surviving and making your way in the world. It wasn't on finding the present moment. So for me, progressively over the years, over the different stages, I see that I had to be worked with the symbols of the world, and for me to let go of career pursuits or pursuits that I had when I was a teenager in my 20s. I had to be persuaded through the miracles that there was another way, and that this was to my benefit. And then as I got more into it, I noticed Jesus was using words and phrases like teacher of God or minister of God. And I could see that he wasn't using them in the same way that you might think of a teacher in the world, or even as a minister in the world, that there could be a lot of concepts and theology around that idea too, that he was taking myself to a state of mind, and a new sense of the Beatitudes. The kindness that you mentioned is paramount. The kindness, the compassion, and the sense of non-judgment. So it took me a while to start to open up, to realize that Jesus says guidance is evaluative. And then he really shows us that the Holy Spirit can use anything that the ego made. So I would say that guidance, when we receive instructions or even feelings, prompts, nudges, they're all very important, because that's our higher self. That's the Holy Spirit reaching us in a very practical way through our consciousness with, what would you have me say? Where would you have me go? Who would you have me meet? All those things are extremely practical. And it took me a while from just going to course groups and reading and studying to actually start to be ready to go on what in Australia they call it walkabout. Mine was more of a drive-about in the United States and Canada, but there was years of that travel. There's nothing special about travel, but it's just another form or format that the Spirit can use to take us out of our past learning and our comfort zones, ego comfort zones. So I think I had a period after the period of study and deep prayer and meditation and contemplation. There was like a period of maybe about 5 years of intense travel without having plans and without knowing where I was going to stay, or without having a lot of money or having any kind of institutional support. It was learning divine providence. It was learning to trust. It was learning to pray, listen, follow for about 5 years. So the first two phases for me were more of a prayer and study, and using the book is literally an oracle, closing my eyes and praying and popping it open and receiving answers, because I wasn't hearing the voice of Jesus at that point. So I would pray very sincerely, pop open my Course in Miracles oracle, and then read quite a lot. I was reading about 8 hours a day during that phase, the first 2.5 years. But the second phase was more like putting it into practical application of pray, listen, and follow. Because when you're traveling, there's just so many more things coming at you. new people, new places, new scenarios, new circumstances, new situations. And I see that that was by design. I could see Jesus was using that too, because it was taking me out of past patterns of routines and habits and on the fly. Let's do this on the fly. Trust me, Jesus was saying, trust me every day, turn to me and let me show you that I will provide for you. So I was getting the dismantling speed up there, and also the here, let's actually discover as an actual experience what divine providence is, where you don't have jobs and people paying you money on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. You literally need to trust me for, yeah, places to stay and everything. So it was pretty radical. Those first two 5-year segments were kind of like popping the cork off of the off the champagne bottle, and then Jesus generally pouring out glasses of champagne as I would let go and trust and notice how wonderful things were going. He's like, okay, let's celebrate this. Yeah, good. It's going well.
And also, I remember from our last conversation, him saying to me, to you, like, "Oi, stop saying no to people when they offer you somewhere to stay or something to eat. That's me trying to help you."
Yeah, that was a big one. That was a huge one. I was not raised with that kind of trust, It was more don't trust strangers and don't accept anything from strangers. That was the conditioning.
But I mean, radical, just to pick up that word radical that you've used. And there's a guy who's written a book which will be coming out soon. And it's a really beautiful book on the Course. And he asked me to look at a pre-release copy and to be a guest on a series that he's putting together. And I mentioned how powerful that word radical is for me in terms of like looking at the Course and also understanding why this system needs to be like only 50 years old. It needs to be so modern because it's so radical. And I picked out just a couple of things that reinforce that. One being the fact that, how many systems do you have where they say God doesn't know what's going on in the world? And how many atheists do you know who struggle with the idea of having faith because they come at you with things like, well, if God exists, how could he let children die, and how could he let stuff, so that in itself is incredibly radical. And then this model of forgiveness that we've just never seen the like of before, where it's like you forgive your brother for what he didn't do to you.
Yeah.
You forgive your own mind for projecting a guilt onto someone, onto a situation, onto the world, onto the screen, because that's not what's there underneath that projection. And I think, radical is, of late, it's something where I've just found myself going, wow, and like I said, to the point of thinking, well, I can see why the Course couldn't be 2,000 years old. It couldn't be it would have passed through so many hands and so many interpretations and blah, 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 that at least at the moment, why it's only 50 years old, it's completely up to date conceptually, in as much as it presents us with thought and ideas that we've not seen before, have we?
Yeah, it's so amazing to me that actually a few weeks ago I decided, I was in the midweek, and I thought, I sometimes do, it's every other Saturday, a movie, a teaching movie for people around the world. And I said to my friends, I said, there's a new Einstein movie that's out. There's a new movie out with Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis called Freud's Last Session. And I said, and Gandhi, oh, we can't forget Gandhi. So I said, just make me a movie with these these 4 characters. This was like 2.5 days, 3 days before Saturday. And they were like, I said, here's some movies you can use, and use the clips from Gandhi. And I gave a few ideas, and they did it. Turned it into like an hour and 27-minute movie montage. And I used it. I did a 6-hour teaching session on that. But it relates to your point that you were just making, that you know, a lot of religions throughout the centuries were based on more on theologies, but the theologies did connect God to this world.
Yeah.
And it was a kind of, I call it an anthropomorphic God, a
Sure.
very human God that was made up. And then other systems were very good about you should do this and not do this, and the do's and the don'ts, but not really getting into the mind and to the unconscious mind and to the idea of projection. And so for me, I like that part. It's pretty late in the text where he starts to say, you know, you have like a two-tiered self-concept. There's the dream that you dream in secret, and then the dream that you gave away, which is the projected world. The dream that you gave away, it seems like things are happening to the dream character that you are identified with, the body, that are beyond your control.
Yeah.
And of course, that's what, when atheists are looking at that, they're going, look at all of history, what's happened to humans. If you just look open-eyed at history, how could a God of love be all loving and all knowing and all powerful with that? And then you need to get into the subconscious mind, the shadow that Jung talks about, the dream that you dream in secret. And sometimes people will say, so it has all these unconscious beliefs of sin and separation and death, and it's out of awareness. It's like, yeah, Jesus calls it the unwatched mind. It's in the basement, it's in the cellar. And then they'll talk to me like, how dark are we talking here? Let's have a straight talk on that. And I said, well, Jesus does use 3 words that I think convey how dark is the unconscious mind. He says it's draped with sin. Draped with sin. Draped, dripping with sin, with error, with darkness, and it's out of awareness. So that's why when people write books, why do bad things happen to good people? That's the dream that was given away. That's what's just perceived through the 5 senses as reality. But we know from the Course that it's far from reality. And Jesus will actually poke fun. He'll say the real world is not like the world you see. There are no buildings and streets with artificial light. There are no stores where you buy things that you don't even need and don't even want, with green paper strips and piles of metal discs. He refers to, I think, you know, in one lesson, maybe 76. And he's poking fun at everything that's accepted as reality. And he's saying, no, the real world, the forgiven world, the happy dream isn't like this at all. And so to me, that gives a context. Like I recently was in a little town in Mexico I'd never been to, it was a city called Saltillo. And I did a 2-day gathering. The first day was all people who had studied the Course their whole life, and all the Course in Miracles students and teachers there. The teacher who was hosting it, she'd been reading my stuff, listening to the audios and watching videos for 10 years. Of all my stuff, and was very steeped in these deep nuances. And the second one was, she said, why don't we just invite non-duality, yoga, anybody who wants to come. And that second day, I had a man who said, raised his hand when I asked for any questions, preguntas, and he said, yeah, it was just my birthday last week. I had a trip planned to go to I think it was the west coast, where the Mayan ruins are. And he was going to celebrate his 30th birthday. And a couple of days before he was going to go, basically the airline said, we've overbooked, we'll buy your ticket back twice the price that you paid for it. And he thought, no, this is my birthday. I want to celebrate. This is a big deal for me. And the next day he went to sleep before getting up to go to catch his flight. And he went to sleep and he woke up in the hospital emergency room. And he was like, what happened? And his family told him that he was flailing about and screaming like some kind of a major nightmare. And they went in and they got him and they took him to the hospital, and he ended up fracturing his arm in 3 places and not having any idea, going to sleep and waking up with his arm fractured in 3 places in an emergency room. And so his question basically was, why? And he said, I read 2 pages of A Course in Miracles and I didn't understand a word it was saying. I was looking at it, was saying, my hand is not my hand. And I was like, I totally don't get this. So here he's only read 2 pages of the Course and he's kind of had this horrific experience. And then I went in for 20 minutes, gave him the whole context. I said, this is why you're not over in Tulum. You're here to get this context, and this is the big inroads of your entire life. Your spiritual journey begins right now. And I talked about the unconscious mind, the projection, and how there really is no cause for the things in form. They're all unreal effects that are projected from an unreal cause, the ego. And yet I said, you're asking the why question when the real question is basically in your mind is, who am I? And so, and he came up to me with a sling on afterwards, and it was so beautiful. The big eyes glow in his eyes, and his friend that he brought along just brought along big glow in his eyes. And I could see this was the beginning of asking the right questions, you might say, with the Holy Spirit, to dismantle the whole construct, instead of, why did this bad thing happen to me on my birthday of all time? He said, couldn't God have just smashed my car instead of 3 fractures in the arm during my sleep? Couldn't he just smash my car up or something? That's where it started. And oh my gosh, you could feel how profound it is that this was a life turnaround moment for him at 30 years old. So I think you talk about the Course, that's a system of thought where we had to have everything in place before we could have the Course come in the form that it did. Because we had to have the unconscious mind, we had to have basically education in place, psychotherapy and psychiatry, and the mind in place, and then all the religious symbols taken from a lot from the New Testament.
Yeah.
And some from the Old Testament. There was a lot of vernacular that was pulled on, a lot of vocabulary and vocabulary systems, in order to make it so obvious and clear to us that we need to let it all go.
Oh, that's superb. And what a lovely gift on your 30th birthday as well, to have the the path opened up to find what does he say when he says there's no question the world's more frightened to hear than what am I? Or
I do not know the thing I am, what I'm doing, where I'm going, or how to look upon the world, and yet, that's salvation. The ego doesn't want that to be asked, because then you start to let go of everything you believe and everything you think.
Wow, so that brings me beautifully to something again that I was mentioning to you before we pressed record, about the invitation, inviting this intention to invite love into our minds and to create that gap and that space and that welcoming, so that we can feel that presence, and then we can become familiar with what was there underneath all of this smoke and fog, and then start the journey of that new form of identification.
Yeah, the invitation. It's kind of like an invitation to the Holy Spirit, but even with the original two of Helen and Bill, it started with this kind of interaction in the workplace of there has to be a better way of living, considering all the intense relationships and intense emotions in the workplace at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. There has to be a better way. And then Helen saying, yes, Bill, you're right, and I'll help you find it. He was quite startled at that response, but I think that's a good symbol for us of how we don't really have to know the form of the invitation, but there just has to be something inside of us that is open to another way, or believes that there has to be more, or there has to be a way, there has to be a solution. And we may not even have an inkling of what the solution will be, but it's like, I think the seed of faith, it's like that mustard seed of faith that starts us out, like with this young man who was 30 years old. He had the seed of faith. He showed up at this non-dual gathering with me, and then from there, the Spirit just took it and made it much more obvious that this was his beginning of his deep, authentic spiritual path. So yeah, I think, like you mentioned, with your wife writing a book and receiving it from Jesus, but also in more simple, common terms, to kind of turn the mind toward that inner dialogue and say, yeah, there has to be a better way. And I would love it if there was a little bit of context for finding that, the Trinity, or the three-part way of going within in a simple way that children could benefit from that book, actually, and begin what. Before my friend Frances passed away, she contacted me from, she was over in Japan, and she had just done a gathering with, I think it was in Tokyo or Okinawa, but a young man came there, actually a 13-year-old, who came to her and put his name on a list for one-on-ones. So when he came and showed up at 13 for a one-on-one, Francis said, oh, how did you come to be here? Did your mother bring you? And he said, no, I brought my mother. I'm the course student. My mom isn't, but I brought her along. Wow. Francis was like, wow. And he proceeded to give a little more, saying, actually, I've been doing the course since I was 9, and pretty full on. She said, what you've been studying the book and everything? He said, no, I'm giving retreats. I give retreats on the course. And Francis was like, she was calling me, I was in a hotel. We were just laughing and laughing as she was telling me the whole thing. And then she said he pulled out his phone. He said, would you like to see photos of my retreat posters that I put out? And he had actual posters for the retreats that he'd been doing and was doing on the course. And we both laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed, because we thought, what were we doing at 9 years old? And what were we doing at 13? Just to put it in perspective. And recently, some friends from the United States, they said, we have an 11-year-old daughter who wants to meet you. And she said, very insistent, when will you take me to Mexico to meet David? And it just went on for weeks. And finally, they wrote to me, and I said, yeah, come on, bring her down and bring her over to my house, and we'll have a nice lunch. Yeah. So they brought their 11-year-old, and she had some questions for me. She was a little shy to ask, but I asked her, well, how have you been working with the course? And she said, well, when my mom would have to go out when I was 9, again, 9, she said she would have to leave the house and leave me on my own. And she said, oh, it's fine. If you just leave me with David's audio of the workbook lessons and the commentaries, then you can go, Mom. I'll just listen and his voice soothes me. And so she's at 9 taking the course workbook lessons and the commentary that I'm giving
Yeah.
after it. So, and now she and her parents have taken a 6-month leave of absence from the United States. And I just had lunch with them last week, and we don't know the possibilities of what will unfold from that. But that's what we mean by it's a whole new generation. It's a whole new era with the course. Those are just a couple examples that we just can laugh at and throw our hands in the air and go, oh my God, what was I doing at 9 years old?
Wow. There's an invitation.
Yeah, that's an invitation. That just shows it's not up to us. It's just our willingness and readiness in our heart, because it doesn't really have to do with age so
No.
much either.
And I guess as well as an adult, you could almost even think, well, how is the intellect developed at 9 years old to want to engage with this material? Blah blah. The ego is going to have a field day with those numbers, and those figures, and that construct. And it's like, well, here's an example that it's not even relative. It's matter.
Yeah, I think too, it's that connecting point, because I think for a 9-year-old, the course would seem to have quite a lot of 3 and 4 syllable words, but with listening to the workbook's quite direct and much less wordy. And then with my commentary, and then starting to watch videos where I give example after example after example, that she can relate to.
Yeah.
She's as an 11-year-old, she can relate to that.
Mm.
And also I think she sees me laughing and she's playful. And the funny thing was, before her parents brought her to see me, I started hearing these 2 words in my mind from Jesus. It was youth minister.
Mm.
And I'm like, but she's just 11. And then when she came, she's very tall for her age. She's the tallest in her class among boys and girls. Her parents said she's a born leader. She's very confident. So then I went out for another lunch when they came down more recently last week. And I said, what do you like to do? And she said, video editing. And she had made, her mom had a video of mine playing in the background, and she'd taken that, and she had a video clip of me, and then she put a little baby bottle inserted at the bottom, with the little nipple and at the bottom of the picture, and then she put on a colored vest on me. She was practicing her video. It was a very brief little video, but she said, you want to see? She showed me. She said, here's the video I did. I said, okay. And then what else? I like to design. I like to design things. She's 11, and she was starting to go through all the things that she enjoys. Gymnastics. She was just very transparent. And I did have, again, the feeling, I thought, well, that's probably why we're having another lunch here, because there's some things, they're down here for 6 months, and there are things the Spirit wants to unfold. And it just shows how it's not so much about trying to read it intellectually and understand it, because the curriculum of the course is really a thought reversal, and it's letting the intuition, the Holy Spirit, do the thought reversal. And I could feel that with her. I could feel like she's well underway at 11, and it kind of breaks the mold of seeing the course as a book that is just to be intellectually studied, which we talked about. It's getting the toolbox much further ahead in the advancing awakening than just trying to pull it off from the words just by themselves.
Yeah. Rather than just holding your hands up and going, I can recite an entire chapter. I know that all the workbook lesson titles, I can get all the quotes right. Why does it say forget this world, forget this course? Because that signpost, that symbol's pointing towards that lived and learned experiential application of this understanding. And again, what comes into my mind listening to you there is the Einstein phrase of if you can't understand it simply, you don't, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I think it also gets paraphrased, or there might be two quite similar phrases where he says, if you can't explain it to a child, you don't know it well enough. And then I was thinking about how in the course, how powerful that use of that word children is with us lot, whether we're 95 years old or 9 years old, the word children is very purposeful, as is everything that's used in the course. And it's to give us that sense of just like, don't get ahead of yourselves with this idea of grandeur in terms of like an evolution of position. It's like you're still children, and how lovely is that? Because the wisest people that I ever hang out with are children. If I go to a party and there's 20 adults sitting around the table drinking wine and talking about the news, you're going to find me in the garden pretending to be a butterfly with a 5-year-old running around seeing where we can, drink nectar from flowers and stuff, because those guys know what's going on.
Yeah, that's it. I feel like it's a heart-to-heart connection that's based on this desire to know the truth. And I think Judy Whitson's daughter, Tamara, the president of the Foundation for Inner Peace, she had one of the women contact me one time. They were doing a podcast or a streaming based on millennials and Gen Zs, basically up to maybe, she said up to 31 years old. Do you know anybody? And I knew a bunch of people. I sent a bunch of names in from different countries, places that I've been, most of them in their 20s or early 30s that are deeply immersed into the course. Some of them deeply immersed, some of them maybe a year or so in. And then recently, in the past 2 or 3 months, I was contacted and was in contact with a woman who was 26 years old and very sincere about the course. And I said, are you Gen Z or millennial? And she said, I'm in between, I'm both. She said, I said, okay. And we've had some beautiful chats, but I had her on my YouTube channel where I just talked to her and discussed and interviewed, and she's so intuitive with so many crisp skills, very, very articulate, very talented, and very sincere course student who basically would go to course groups and see people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and she's 26. And she was contacting me saying, maybe we could do a talk about the generation gap in the course in miracles, because this body now is 66. So 26 and 66, we got on there, and her name was Sammy, and we had a wonderful encounter. But it brings us to that form content thing. Like, the content is love, and the gateway is the bridge is forgiveness, and we can have that. And her main thing was, I'm writing a book. I'm going to send you 6 chapters, David, because I want to put it in words and wording for my generation. I want to put it in the generation that I'm a part of. And I said, absolutely wonderful. I would be glad to look over those chapters and talk with you. And that got us going, again, for teaching what we would learn, extending the love and letting it come through in a practical, relevant way for the miracle receiver, whoever's reading it or anything. So I love that. I love that what we're talking about is we're going for the content here, and we're just letting the Holy Spirit be in charge of the form, and let the Holy Spirit use the form to reach the mind in a way that's relevant and pertinent.
That's fantastic. Beautiful. And again, this is what people need. It's like I was saying to you earlier about the percentage thing that I've been mulling over at the moment, about explaining to someone again recently who in like a counseling session about about there not being any degrees. You know, if we look at these, again, really purposeful symbols and teaching devices, there's no degrees, you know, and no small upsets. And thinking just from my own point of view, just how valuable it was when that penny dropped, to just think, wow, I can't be just a little bit pissed off. You know, I'm either going to be happy or I'm not going to be happy. And this is like something that is very easy to communicate to people who don't realize that there's a spiritual aspect to their being. It might not be on their radar at all. It might be hiding somewhere, awaiting for that moment, but they can grasp those concepts. And you see that penny drop with them when they think, God, yeah, okay, so I'm either happy or sad, you know. And then if you started to say to them, okay, so, you know, how much of your day do you spend happy, at peace, or not at peace? Or, you know, is it 90-10, 80-20, 70-30, blah, blah, blah. And then, like I said to you earlier, then the kind of evolution of that conversation, that explanation is to say, listen, you know, every moment you're making a decision between 0 and 100%, or 100% and 0, or the belief in 0. um, and one word that's been coming up a lot on the podcasts as they evolve is this word reductionism, which we would know from a scientific background of trying to narrow down the bandwidth of all of the scenarios you're positing as you're trying to work out whether or not your theory is correct or not. And I think, you know, every time you can make an advancement of your understanding, which reduces everything, which takes away, it's like pruning a rose bush or something, you know, and you just narrow you. But your goal, in a sense, is to encourage it to flourish to its greatest potential. But you're also trying to whittle it down to its smallest core, because the essence, you know, I was thinking of maybe something Marianne Williamson's talked about once, about a self-organizing and self-correcting universe that we live in, where the acorn has already got the imprint of the tree in it, the embryo has already got the imprint of the baby in it, you know, this preordained, the script is written kind of symbolic language where everything's ahead of us. So although you're trimming this rose bush down with a view to it flourishing to its fullest potential, you also know that right down at the core of it is everything. The totality of Christ is in every part, you know. And I think people really benefit from that journey of like finding that one lesson in the workbook. You know, my favorite is like, God goes with me wherever I go. All the other lessons, loads of them come into my head at different times and really speak to me. But for some reason, whenever I open the book and I've forgotten what, or I don't know what page, and I see that, I just, my smile goes from here. It just has that effect on me, which says, Leon, that's your favorite lesson. It is, you know.
Gotcha again with the favorites. The best of.
Best of, yeah. The best of A Course in Miracles.
Yeah.
And you know, I explain to people that that's incredibly valuable. You know, you don't have to think, right, I need to remember 365 lessons. And if someone says to me, right, what's lesson 219? I go, oh no, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, and if that's valuable to someone, and if they got that in their tank to be able to go, lesson 219 is just, and it's like, wow, brilliant. You know, it'd be quite fun probably. I'd go, okay, then, so what's lesson 146 or whatever? And that would be great. But equally, you know, this reductionism, just like trim, 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 get right down to the core, you know, a decision between peace and not feeling at peace, between love and fear. You know, when you realize that all of this effort that goes into explaining this to us from all of these different pages and different places and positions and viewpoints. It's just shouting the same thing in our ear over and over.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's really helpful to have a text with 31 chapters that kind of comes at it from all these different angles, saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Kind of like with Jesus saying, here, I'll try this one. Did you get it? Okay,
right.
we'll try this way. Did you get it? Okay, we'll try this way. And then the workbook, you know, I feel like when people ask me about spiritual awakening, the practical application, moment by moment as you go through the day is kind of the key that really unlocks the sleeping mind and takes you radically toward the holy instant. And since the last time we've talked, there's been a lot of things around me in those whatever 18, 19 episodes or whatever that's taken place. I started years ago. I was into practical application. I practiced with my relationships. I practiced with spiritual communities. I practiced with travel, day-to-day travel to countries I didn't speak the language and parts of 6 continents, some of which I, of course, never visited. And then I start to put together like simple workbook or simple processes, like you were saying, like with Einstein, you have to be able to explain it simply to really, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't get it. That's why I like this recent Einstein movie, Einstein and the Bomb, because they're asking him all, could you put that in simple terms? And he uses the most simple examples that are just like, wow, explaining the deepest principles in science with the most simple examples. I love that. But one of the things I did initially was I started doing these forgiveness worksheets called Instrument for Peace. It was filling in blanks, starting off with the perceptual realm and what you're feeling and what your thoughts are, and then working down all the way to the desire and the desire for a miracle, to see that the block was a self-concept block. It was holding on to a self-made image, and that's why there was an investment in an outcome happening in form based on the self-concept. Are you willing to release the belief in this concept and open to a new way? You know, so first it was there, then I had friends that were trying to put it on with Google Voice and get it verbal and get it into apps, and that all evolved over maybe the last 7 years. And now I'd say since the last time I talked to you, we've had a big team of AI experts making David AI. They were taking like ChatGPT and some of the latest, greatest, the most advanced AI programs available, and it's only as good as the database you feed into it. So they would feed only A Course in Miracles and all my teachings over, let's say, the last 15 or 20 years, digitizing it, spending hours going through it to make it, added to the database, and then getting a David AI model that would literally be able to answer any question about the course, and then getting into practical application of the course, which is what people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, their daily lives. So my friend Laverne, she was training it, and the teams were training it, and it would try to go to the internet and pull other philosophies and other things, and they just wanted to stay with the real deep, pure database of the course and my teachings over these last 20 years. So they had to keep retraining this thing week after week. When it would make mistakes, it would seek outside itself to try to bring in something else. And then we started to realize, wow, this has huge application for when we're traveling and doing events. It's so much energy to do all the communications with the host and around the venues. So they made AI they're working on a travel AI bot. They're working on an admin AI bot to save time for everyone, so we don't have to put so much time in admin. And then they have a David AI bot and a community AI bot for people who are interested in relationships and community and how does that work. They've got a bot for that. And the ultimate thing, though, was they call it Forgiveness AI, which they have trained this thing now using a very, very strict database that is only related to course teachings and practical application of course teachings. And it will start off with basically, how do you feel? And if you say you're upset in some way, it will take you into the mind like you're talking to a counselor, a spiritual psychotherapy counselor. It will take you into your mind toward the release point of forgiveness. With any angle you want. And it actually, if you don't know what you feel, it will offer suggestions of groups of names of feelings. So you can zip into just the feeling that you're going through at that moment. So since our last talk, there's been things going on around me that are highly sophisticated. And while the world is talking about, is AI a danger and should we control it or, rule it or regulate it or not, or eliminate it, we've already got, it's already the Holy Spirit and Jesus have got it big time. And so it's almost like having a counselor. I think Forgiveness AI is it's a counselor, but you could do it. You can go in, log in, and work with your counselor. If you can't sleep at 3 a.m, you can't get a hold of your Course in Miracles teacher or facilitator. You can go right in and work with it right then when you can't sleep at 3 a.m. So there's bunches and bunches of things that are happening around me that is just because we have a lot of very young. We got some Gen Z, millennials. We've got people that have from all age ranges that are working on collaborative teams in kind of a very swift way, which is so different for you and I, because we started out as these shy guys that had everything bottled up, and we had a very individual journey, and for both of us, literally, it has exploded into the contacts that we're making and the people we're working with. It's just going an exponential rate, including this 11-year-old that's down here in Mexico. And I have no idea what the Spirit's going to do with her life, but she's got a fast start. I know at 11, I can't even think what I was doing, but I was definitely numbed out and and shy and probably trying to avoid the world at 11, not going on trips and learning about these things for sure.
You didn't put any requests in to have lunch with a 66-year-old spiritual teacher at 11.
That's it. Now that even the age won't matter with David AI. So, I have somebody who moved. I counseled with her, and she moved all the way from the Pacific Northwest down here to Mexico. She rented a flat and so forth, but she was having questions about level confusion and there's questions, and I said, well, there's some good bots here that you could use. She said, no, I can't get a hold of a human being now. Everything's I call about Visa Help. It's a recording, it's voicemail, it's bots, it's everything. So I finally called her up and we laughed and I said, ask your questions. And she said, her first question was, it says in the Course that we can simply turn and walk out of this world. She said, I've been wanting to turn and walk out of this world for a lot of years. And I said, well, that phrase is kind of a metaphor. Because she was like waiting for the literal turn and walk. And then she said, what's this part about God will take the final step? I said, well, that's another metaphor for remembering divine creation. It's not like God is taking steps. God's not like sitting back. Okay, a little more. Okay, I'll take the final step. It's not, we had to go past the literal interpretation to go deeper. But in the end, we just share the joy, and everybody, the spirit comes through in a way that people can hear it. And for her, she said, I need a live person to talk to. I want to talk about level confusion. I want to talk about cause and effect. I want to talk about these phrases. And yeah, in half an hour, we boom, 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 go flying through those things.
Because interestingly, you know, one of the themes of conversation that's been developing through the podcast is about this, about these two different aspects of like the non-dual understanding. If we want to get right to the non-dual understanding of the silent stillness, of the awareness of the peace and love of God, then obviously that's beyond words, it's beyond symbols. There's nothing to talk about. You and I just sit here for the duration of our connection in complete silence, and that says more of that state than the description of it. But equally, there's a phrase that I really like that says, we can use the language of duality without believing it. And we need that language, you know, and at the end of the day, we are social beings to a certain extent. You know, a lot of us are comfortable in our own skin, and we could go for a walk in nature, or we could do whatever on our own, but equally there is a great joy in communion. And with communion, silent communion is beautiful, but equally talking is beautiful as well, and sharing and strengthening ideas. So I think it's, you know, it's really important to meet, for us all to meet one another wherever we are. And even if we think we're far down the path of reaching a non-dual understanding where we couldn't possibly want to talk to somebody, there might be a point in the day of that person who does fancy just chatting about the weather, or saying, isn't this soup that we're eating nice? Or, you know, oh, I really fancy a glass of water. So I think it's important that there's an equality to communication, whether or not the end game of going beyond language is something that you hold in your mind at all times, either as something present or as just something felt rather than articulated, or you're trying to remember, you know, that reality is beyond form, and like he says, you know, salvation is nothing more than the escape from concepts. Yeah, okay, brilliant, amazing. But we are still here, you know, let's have a nice time. Let's check around us and see who's near us and who we're in the proximity of, to be able to go, are you okay? Do you need to talk about something? Where are you at, you know?
Yeah, I like God's version of the lesson in the workbook. I will step back and let him lead the way. That I find that's a very practical lesson, like the one you mentioned. God goes with me wherever I go, and I think that was the value for me of traveling and being exposed to so many people at course groups, but in basements, backyards, barbecues, buses, trains, planes, thousands and tens of thousands of these encounters that I was aware none of them were by accident, and they all were holy encounters. They were just huge opportunities for me to teach what I would learn, not necessarily in words, but in attitude, like through kindness, through that feeling of love and connection, and that feeling of helpfulness. And I found that that's what the invitation was. I really willing to be helpful. That's what the invitation was from the Holy Spirit and Jesus. And when I said yes, then whoever he would send to me, it would help me. I felt more blessed from the encounter. I felt like whatever came through me when I was just there to be helpful was what I needed to hear most. So it was seemingly a dyad of one person talking to another, but in my mind level, it was like the spirit laughing, saying, "Ah, this is the answer to what you've been pondering for the last 20 hours. You just spoke it. Did you hear it? what you spoke there in true helpfulness, did you hear it was for your own mind?" And that kind of undoes the riddle of separation. And I like that when we give ourselves over, we're using countless ways to really find the heart of it, to really get to the core of that love, and really it's involuntary. I love that line in the Course that miracles are involuntary. They should not be under conscious control. Involuntary, that's not anything our conditioning. Mom and Dad weren't saying, "Oh, don't put too much worry and concern about your studies and your papers and your career and everything. Just be ready to be an involuntary miracle worker and be used by spirit." We just were not raised with that. And then even when we start studying the Course, it's strange. It's odd. Miracle worker? Who, me? Are you sure you got the right one? Oh, yes, we don't make mistakes. Are you sure about that? Because our self-concept is a lot of unworthiness and darkness and lack of love and fear and guilt. And we're wondering, like, how can we be a miracle worker? And what does that even mean? But I think it's just to be present with, like you just said, whoever's with you, who's around you, who contacts you, to be in a prayerful state of willingness to be helpful. And I do get a lot of some pretty extreme, seemingly extreme requests, maybe every week, but there just is always a spaciousness at times to just sit down and say, okay, now answer this one, answer that one.
Right.
And sometimes it's a video call, and sometimes it's a text or a WhatsApp. Sometimes it's a comment on a video, or somebody asked me a question. Who was that singer that sang "The Light Has Come"? What's her name? And I put Netta Bowen. There I go. I put the link to the song. But it's just that heart to heart. I had a woman contacted me from Europe, and who has been a Course in Miracles student for years, but she said she was suicidal, but she has a little daughter that she never can seriously hold on to the suicide thoughts because of her daughter. But she was just, I'm down to my last 30 euros, and I'm at the rope's end here. My business collapsed, everything's gone wrong, and just, can you help me? And then I just prayed. That was maybe last week, where I've been in touch with this 11-year-old, her parents, and lots of parents and children who are wondering what's the best way to raise their children with these teachings. And I've kind of helped them get together on Zoom calls or WhatsApp group calls. And then now there was a lot of discussion going on of sharing, this worked for me, this is practical for me. So I just gave this woman in Europe the contacts to these parents, and just said, these are Course practitioners who have children who are going through the same thing you are, and just make contact. And then she wrote, thank you. And because that just shows how it's just in the moment. It's just the practicality of praying and giving the thing that feels most helpful, that's guided. And it's not really, we don't need to figure it out in some kind of big scheme of things. It's just in the moment. Pray, listen, and follow. It can't get any simpler than that. So it's really a prayer practice. The Course is taking us into prayer as the medium of miracles, and this is a Course in Miracles. So I always come back to the prayer. What's the prayer of my heart, and really go for that. Really see that's so important.
And it's making me think of where he's talking as well about communication being almost like the antidote, or what removes loneliness. If you're talking about someone who feels isolated in Europe and you're connecting them with a family who are currently in Mexico, that collapse of distance and time zones to bring those people together, and they can connect and share thoughts and feelings and not feel alone. Communication is just absolutely key. And interestingly, I'm glad you brought up travel again, because travel's a great way of again communicating, maybe to people who aren't also spiritual, and just sort of saying, if you look at the origins of us as a species, when we were nomadic, and the changing environment around us, as you described with your 5 or so years of journeying in America and Canada, is like, I know it from being a musician. In fact, we used to have this big old Mercedes van, and we would be driving around to countries like Germany, and on the corner of the streets, they didn't put the street name on a sign. It would be like maybe maybe like 100 meters down the road, and we're already driving on the wrong side of the road because our vehicle's from England. There was one piece of glass that had smashed, was replaced with a piece of perspex, which was really discolored right where the wing mirror was. So, these things involved, and we used to pre-sat nav, turn into a street, get down there, be looking at the map, trying to translate this word, and we're like, wrong road. Now we're going to have to turn around in this huge van on the wrong side of the road, go back to. So there's so much just in that travel that directed our focus outside ourselves. And then if you think back to the origin of us as a species, of like moving with the seasons, moving with the food and the crops, and the following animals, and looking for water, and just constantly on the move, our focus and our attention was very much positioned outside the mind. And then if our days were spent foraging and gathering what we needed before we could then sit down, set up camp, build a fire, people would sing and dance, look up at the stars, tell stories, and ride that wave of just like satisfaction, of awe and wonder, of like, where are we? What is this place? And then wake up in the morning, pack everything up, and off you go again. To that point where we domesticated ourselves, and then we said, right, I'm going to just stay here now. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to live in this pot box like every single day, and jump on the same bus that takes me to the same train station, that takes me to the same. And then what happens is, like, people no longer need to focus on their environment, and all of a sudden introverted thought, people then go too far in here. They're not in the moment. They're not walking down. There's a thing that I do. I'll do it when I'm with my wife, but I'll do it on my own as well. If I'm waiting for a train, I'll look around and just do a head count, and I guarantee you, if there's 10 of us and I'm one of those 10, the other 9 people are on their phone. And that again is, they're focusing on something that they might be looking at a picture of something on the other side of the world, or a video. They're not in the moment. They're not where they are, almost 2 steps away, and that'll be 9 out of 10 people, and I'll be the one person who's just standing there looking at the clouds, listening to the birds, looking at the trees and the shadows that are being cast, and maybe look at the train tracks and think, wow, who came up with that? And just try to be present in the moment, and sort of have your attention outside yourself, so that you can feed from all of the details of that current experience. And the people who aren't experiencing change of travel, the origins, like this nomadic thing that I'm talking about, where I could still walk from I'm sure you could where you live, and most of us could come out my front door, walk to the shops, get some milk, and walk back without paying any attention, because I've done it 1,000 times. So I think there's something in the evolution of us as a species which has taken our focus away from outside, and then that's created this scenario where people are just in their minds. And then as he says in the work, in the course, is like, very few people realize that when you're thinking about the future or the past, you're not thinking at all, because thought
Mind is blank.
yeah, your mind's blank. And I mean, thought itself is a concession. Like I was saying to you about the use of dualistic language, it's helpful, but we don't have to believe in it. And thought and any attempt at description is a concession because it requires consciousness, and therefore it requires something to be conscious of and something. So we can sit there and go da 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 and want to break all of that down and get to the non-dual silent stillness, the awareness of oneness that of course would call heaven. But we are here. There are loads and loads of people who are trapped in there, and it's not a nice place for them. And a large part of that is this the loss of stimulation from the external world, and looking outside at that. Although we'd say at a metaphysical level there is no world, if somebody's going to walk from their house to the train station and the sky is beautiful today and the trees are lovely and the birds are tweeting, and even the opportunity to watch people walk past you, and to there's something that the lovely Keith Kavanagh put in my mind where he's talking about the section of the totality of Christ is in every part. And he also talks about everything is just love, being love and knowing it's love, or everything is love, being love and not knowing it's love. So then that can change how you walk down the street, and you can look at all of these different characters. And I live in a very colourful city in England. There's all sorts of people doing all sorts of stuff, having a lovely time. And I can look at all these people and think, wow, the totality of Christ is in you, the totality of Christ. It's fascinating. So you could say it could come back to there is no world, and we understand that, but equally you can enjoy this experience as it is at the moment, and then you float down the road and you don't know if somebody's looked at you and gone, wow, what's that guy's secret? And in their mind have connected, and that's the true level of communication, isn't it? So I think there's something very interesting about that, about when we decided to stop moving and just sat down, and what that initiated in terms of how that brought that external focus inside. And a lot of people's issues are the fact that they spend too much time in there and it's not a nice place for them.
Yeah, I know we talked earlier about how we're asking a little bit about Frances Zhu, my friend, because I sometimes people would ask her like about me with the course, and she said, oh, he knew that course before he picked it up to read it. But also I would say with Frances, she's passed away now, but she basically, I said if there was an encyclopedia and there was a topic theme called spiritual awakening, they could put Frances's photo there, because from the time I met her and the time she would even hear the voice speaking to her in her mind, even when my lips were moving, she would be getting some kind of deep spiritual recognition, like pay attention here, or this is the step, or this is the way. We ended up traveling to many, many countries, many, many continents, and sharing many gatherings. But she actually studied and practiced the lesson so deeply that was an unwinding of the self-concept. She came from Beijing. She lived in Australia, in Sydney. She was married. She had a couple houses. She eventually had her own business. She was what the world would say successful, but she just had a call for something more. And then she told me that before she met me, she had a course group in Sydney, and she was trying to just teach it as we do at the beginning, more conceptually. Just read the book, and formed a meetup group with a group of people from Sydney, and would teach and learn it. But then the more we came together and the more she came to like week-long retreats and immersed, deeply into it, she started to go through a guided unwinding from the self-concept and allow her mind to become a conduit for Jesus and for the Holy Spirit. And we did many gatherings where we would just online or travels just show up, and that's it. We didn't really have a plan or an agenda where whenever we would go somewhere, but she just went so deeply with it that she got to a point last year where she was feeling like she wanted to go with her partner on a teaching tour through Australia and Japan, and took this trip, 7.5 week trip, and had amazing sessions with people in Australia, East Coast, West Coast, Perth, and Okinawa, Tokyo. And then she came back, and then as soon as she came back, she went through a series of things which like a prearranged letting go of the body over a period of months, where we would just join. And even during the letting go of the body, her primary focus was true empathy. Even when people would come in to try to help her or care for her or bathe her or move her or whatever, she would bring the topic back to true empathy. True empathy. She was that Christ in everyone, in the nurses and the doctors, and in going through a process that was really, a script is written, a prearranged process of laying the body aside fairly rapidly, and it was beautiful too, because for everyone it really brought them to an opportunity to crack wide open with any of the sadness they had, the feelings of grief or loss. For the community down here in Mexico, it was a huge opening for that. We would sit together and talk to the whole group, a smaller group initially, and then with a larger group. And people she just started appearing in their dreams. She would start talking to them in their minds, in their dreams, appear in visions of light. One of the community was like saying, I've got to do something to heal her. And then after he said that, he had this huge vision. She appeared in all this blazing light, and he was like, oh my gosh. The problem wasn't trying to heal the body, it was to open the heart to the light and to the Christ. So that really provided, again, so many helpful opportunities to let go of linear perception and really pray in the heart and say, what is this for me? What is this showing me? And her name was Frances, and so her name in China when she was born was called Yuhong, but she took this kind of Western name, Frances. I just heard this morning that her mother took her ashes from cremation, and just today, as we're talking right now, she was admitted to a very prestigious kind of cemetery in China, only for those who have done something huge for the betterment of society. They only reserve this for people where her ashes were put in a little altar. But when she passed away, the very day that she passed away down here in central Mexico was Saint Francis Day. And Saint Francis and Jesus are huge in Mexico. They have all the different saints, but on the very day that she passed away, the town that's really right close to us, where we have our La Casa de Milagros, they sent up fireworks, and the skies were all lit up in honor of Saint Francis, and we all just see the symbols as, yeah, well, that was for us too. It was an explosion of glory for an entire life, 40 some years lived that were given over to the Holy Spirit and Jesus to use on many different continents in many different countries, just as a conduit for that guidance. And the main thing I remember too is that from the very beginning, she said she went for a walk with my friend Jason to get some groceries. And when I was visiting her house, and she just, in the grocery store, she just cornered Jason and she said, listen, what's it going to take? Bottom line, come on. What's it going to take? She was very accomplished, owned business and houses and married and all this. And what's it going to take? And Jason said, trust. and she said, trust who? in the grocery store. And he said, well, start here. Trust me and trust David, because we're right in your house right now. And she did, and she took off like a firecracker. She had experiences that people would not hardly even believe. We were visiting Judy Scutch one time, and Judy was there, and we were all, Tamara and Judy, and Judy was saying, well, is there anything that's gone on recently? And we said, well, I said, Francis, tell Judy Scutchwitz, and tell her the story of the three priests. And Francis said, okay, I will. So as she unwinds from this world and becomes like a conduit, she really becomes St. Francis, a modern day St. Francis. She basically, her mother is still worried about her, as mothers can be, and still concerned. And at one point, she was guided to divorce her husband, Tim, and her mother and Tim were quite concerned with her pathway. So they sent a priest to visit her to basically tell her she had gone on the wrong path with the Course in Miracles, and she needed to turn away and come back. That she had gone on the wrong path with the Course in Miracles. And she was kind of shaken by the first priest when the first priest came, because it kind of jolted her. Her mom kind of surprised her mom and her ex-husband. Then the second priest came, and she was a little more relaxed after that first encounter. And again, you're brainwashed, you need to turn away. This is not Jesus. Jesus would never have you leave the world behind, da 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 da. And she went through that, and she engaged with this priest and talked and everything. The third priest, she was, I think, in a San Francisco hotel. Her mother had come across from China to visit her. She's in a high-rise hotel. She goes into the shower, and when she comes out, her mom's there with the third priest. This priest was a Course in Miracles student for many years who had discovered that it was the work of the devil after many years of reading it and practicing it, and was a specialized Course in Miracles deprogrammer priest. That Judy Scutch was like, oh, this is good. This needs to be a book. So she's in the shower. She comes out of the shower, and the priest is there, and the priest is like, listen, I need to talk to you. Your mom brought me in here. Let's go have dinner. I have a lot to talk to you about. So she gets dressed and everything, and she's seen it. She's already had two priests visit her, and she's thought, wow, now I've heard it all. This is a Course in Miracles deprogramming priest. And so basically they interact, and she just lets him speak and everything. And the more he kind of goes in for the jugular of, that you've lost your way and you've gone the wrong way, Francis just burst into laughing, just burst. The more that the ex-Course in Miracles called deprogrammer priest goes to and she just burst into laughter. And she burst into laughter, and her laughter is so huge that he had to burst into laughter. He had to break into laughter too. And I think he started to question, he started to have maybe another conversion experience in Francis's presence, trying to deprogram her. They got the wrong one, because she was just bursting in laughter. So after that, both started laughing. Then the mother started laughing, and they all started laughing. And then Francis said, "Listen, you want to go to dinner with my mother and I will agree to it on one condition, that we don't talk about anything involving religion, spirituality, or God. Let's go have dinner together and enjoy each other's company and have a great connection and everything." And they did. And that was the third priest. So before Frances laid her body aside, she was blazing, blazing, blazing in the light of Christ. She obviously she had played her part perfectly, and she was so good. We joined our minds so many times over the years that guidance would just come to us. Are you hearing that? I'm hearing it too. Are you hearing that now? I'm hearing that too. We were just hearing the same voice at the same time, which made traveling around the world just a piece of cake, a blast. There was one time we'd just gone all the way around the world. I mean, all the way, literally 360 around the world. We're in a hotel in Beijing. And we're in the hotel and we're looking at each other, and she's going, "Are you feeling what I'm feeling?" And I got a big smile on my face. I'm like, another round the world trip. We just got off one, and we both were smiling and laughing like Jesus is sending us another loop around. So she was so competent and so good that she sat down, and I said, "Okay, let's pray together." And she picked up her laptop, and within that day, she had booked every single flight of going all the way around the world, from Beijing all the way around the world and back. And then we, at the end of the day, we went, okay, all the tickets are booked. Now the people just have to show up. And sure enough, all the places we were guided, cities were guided to book, people flocked, they showed up, everything filled in, and people would say, "How can you plan a round the world tour?" We received it in one flash, and she's so good at computers, she booked every single ticket. There was one time we were flying, I think we were flying to China, maybe, and maybe it was Australia. We were in with a ticket agency, and the ticket said, here, we were checking in. She said, here's your seats, and so on and so forth. And little Frances, she's like probably a foot shorter than I am. She receives the tickets and she looks, and she knows for me that flying, I'm 6 foot, almost 6'1.5". So these trans-Pacific flights are 12-hour flights. It's not easy on the knees when they're scrunched up against another seat. So she said, she got the tickets, and she said to the lady, she said, "David's, you see how tall he is, and I have no problem." She said, but he needs an exit row. And so she says to the lady behind the counter, "David really needs an exit row. Would you check and see if we could get our seats changed to an exit row?" So the woman checks and says, looks up at Francis, says, "I'm sorry, there's no exit row tickets available." And then Francis looks her right in the eye and says, "Look again, look again." And the woman's like, so she goes back to her computer. In that 10 seconds, she goes, "Oh my God, now there's seats available." That's how tuned in Francis was. Look again. And I just stood there and I was like, wow, that's devotion. That's why we called her St. Francis around here. And that's why it wasn't surprising that she died on St. Francis Day, and the fireworks went off and the whole town erupted in celebration, because that was her hurrah, her good afternoon, good evening, and good night. She took her final bow. And to me, that's the most important thing. It's living the course. She got so into devotion that she lived so deeply the course in all of her daily interactions, that even when her health was going down from the world standards and her mother was very concerned, she would say, "Mom, I love you dearly, and you raised me, and I'll always love you, and I'll love my sister. Her dad had passed away, but she said, this is my spiritual family. They have loved me so deeply. So please, when I go and leave, please just be very honoring of them, because they have loved me so dearly, and I have loved them so dearly. And some of the stuff that poured out of her, that we did post at
Yeah.
the end, and then people could write all their emotions and gratitude and everything. It just felt the Spirit gave us that too, just so we could rejoice in all glory to God and all glory to love. And that's the point. So I'm so glad you mentioned that at the beginning, before we got on the program, because that was so touching for me, and it brought so many people to tears, and so many visitations in their dreams, and it's still going on today. People are still telling me, "Oh, Francis was in my dream last night. I was going to go back and do this." She said, "No, don't." It's not time for that yet. They're getting messages from Francis in their dream, and that's the beauty of it.
Wow, that's so beautiful, so lovely, and it reminds me of that beautiful letter to her mum, and also just the way that I very much felt the authenticity of how you were like the figurehead of the wave of experience when she did pass. You were like, this is somebody that I knew incredibly well. I've spent all this time together with, and there was no sense of you wanting to convey any sadness. And I just think that was such a great, powerful example to give, because that helps people as a direct experience for people to go away, sit on their own, and sit down and think, wow, okay, I get it. Somebody on paper, these experiences can be, they can be something that defines someone for a long time in a context that isn't healthy. And I was very aware of that at the time, and I think it was amazing. And yeah, thank you for sharing those beautiful stories. And although I feel like I could keep you on my computer, I've never worked out how many hours I can record.
That's great. True to form. What day is it? What time is it? We're on different sides of the Atlantic Ocean, and just sharing the joy for the glory of God.
That's right. I'll ask my wife to bring me some breakfast in about 9 hours.
Okay, that tells us where you're at. That's beautiful.
So I just think, yeah, thank you for the way that you expressed your experience of Frances's life and for her passing, and how lovely as well. When I sent you the song that finished the record that I wrote about, essentially it came back to me then when you were talking. This album was about somebody reconciling at the start of the album, when a person, his first track's called Fading Star, and then sort of 13, 14 songs later it's called Luminous Star. And at the beginning somebody's very much in the world of form, and their star, they think the influence of this person who's passed away is going to diminish and disappear and fade. And then by the time they come through this whole process, at the end, it's a luminous star. It's like, you know, the presence, she's symbolizing the same things in people's minds, in their dreams, in our hearts, despite not being here physically. But then if we want to go back to our conversation, it's like none of us are here physically. They're in the world, get back onto all of the non-dual aspects of it. So, yeah, I think amazing. Another absolutely beautiful conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you so
you.
much. Really, really
Thank you,
beautiful.
Leon. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, anytime that you have the call in your heart, you said you had a friend that said, when
Yeah,
are you having David back? That was a confirmation, but
that's
yeah,
right.
anytime you feel it, I love sharing with you. And I know that we're just here to help bring a blessing to anyone who hears it or hears about it and is helped in a positive way. It's just beautiful.
And we sit in the joy. I remember last reminds me of last time where like I was off and I was like, oh God, laughing and smiling for 2 hours.
Yeah, it is great. And thank you for your music. I remember when you sent me that song that you composed and shared about with the feeling of Francis, that I just played that and just felt tears of joy just coming down my cheeks, and that's everything. The music, I always feel it goes beyond the realm of more of an intellectual communication, and it's much more vast, and wow, that I feel it. So I'm so grateful that you shared that with me. It was
Maybe
such a
that was her, because
yeah.
I wouldn't. I don't think I would take ownership of like, oh, I'm going to send David this song that I wrote, but it just was like, oh, this is France, and I did it, and you were like,
Yeah,
thank you so much, it really worked, and I was like, well, okay then. So yeah,
beautiful. Thank you, Leon.
thank you. Yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day, David.
I will, and I hope you have a good night's sleep because it's
Yeah,
getting out to the evening hours, definitely nighttime hours for you.
yeah, we're approaching midnight in good old England.
Okay, all right. We really did lose track of time
Good.
here today. We love it.
So tomorrow we're gonna, just take the dog. My wife and I, we're just gonna take the dog. We've got a couple of books that I've left on the kitchen table for when we get up and make coffee, and we're gonna pick a walk and just go and have a joyful experience. And I'm sure our conversation of this evening will come with us.
Yes,
The
yes,
energy,
yes, I feel it.
amazing.
Beautiful.
So you enjoy. Thank you very much for being you and for being here and for being the example that you are, and for sharing your knowledge and understanding and demonstrating.
Thank you, and give my love to your wife too. And great to hear that she has a book. That sounded amazing when we talked ahead of the talk. That sounded beautiful. So just keep me posted with anything with your wife's book, or if you get a date to put this out, if you let me know, I'll share it on some social media, and we'll just keep spreading the good news.
Perfect. Sounds fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.